Hey everyone, this is Kevin from thechesswebsite.com. Today we're going to be going over an aggressive opening called the Scotch Gambit, and it derives from the Scotch game, which is pawn e4, pawn e5, knight f3, knight c6, pawn to d4, and then after pawn takes here on d4, instead of recapturing with the knight here on d4, the bishop is going to come to c4, foregoing this material right away, giving up that pawn on d4 for a large lead in development. Also, as you can tell, this light square bishop is attacking this square on f7, so white's really saying that, hey, I have a strong attack here, so I don't mind giving up this pawn here on d4. Now, there's four main variations that you will see from black as far as the defense, and so we're going to be kind of going over the main lines that you will see. The first one that you'll see is bishop here to c5, kind of the Italian game. Another one you may see is the bishop coming down to b4, again checking the white king here on e1. You also may say the bishop come here to e7, getting ready to castle on the king side. And the last one that you may see is knight to f6, going into kind of the two knights defense here from black, and just kind of going from there. So those are the four variations, and we'll kind of go into it and kind of give you some things to look out for in the opening, and some very aggressive lines that you can try out on your opponents during the Scotch Gambit. The first variation that we're going to be going over today is bishop to c5, kind of transitioning into the Italian game with both the bishops here on the c file. White predominantly has three main lines from here. I'm going to kind of go over briefly all of them and then specifically spend a little bit more time on the opening that I actually find most success with. But the first opening that you would see, it's a very aggressive line. It's knight to g5, putting a lot of pressure on this pawn on f7. Black needs to respond with knight to h6. Again, he needs defenders on this square on f7 because white's just putting a lot of pressure on that. From here, white can continue with queen to h5, again building up that pressure here on f7. Black has to be careful. If he tries to do anything funny, white can definitely run over him, but definitely feel free to try this one out. I do think it's a little bit easier for black to equalize in this, so I don't play this as much, but a lot of people do find success with this, so I definitely want to make sure you guys were aware of it. Another thing that you can do, I don't think it's as aggressive as I like to play, but a lot of players from here just like to go ahead and castle on the king side. And the third option, which I'm going to advocate because I find a lot of success with it, is just pawn here to c3. And this does a lot of things, but it really pressures this center of the board right here. And from here, a lot of times you'll just see black take with his pawn here on c3. The great thing about this, as soon as black captures here on c3, white can go ahead and take here on f7, checking the king here on e8. Now, black has many different options. His worst option would just be to bring, his king to, let's say, f8. He's going to be behind a material. White can go ahead and capture here on c3 if he wants to with his knight. Great development from here from white. Black is pretty much going to have his king running around the board. He can't castle on either side of the board. If he decides to go ahead and capture, which is probably the best move, but again, he's going to be running around the board with his king for the rest of the game anyway. But after he captures here on f7, then the queen can immediately come here to d5. Obviously, he's not only attacking this king here on f7, but he's also attacking this bishop here on c5. Black does have a few options here. If he does fall for one of the traps, he could always come to f6, which is a terrible move. You're then going to have checkmate in a few moves. The bishop can come here to g5 check. After the king comes over, then you swing your queen over to f5, and there's only one move for the king. Comes over here to h5, and then with g4, that is checkmate. So that's one option. Hopefully he's not that terrible, but he could be. He could also bring it over to g6. Again, you really want to bring it back to the 8th rank if possible. From here, it's just going to be checkmate in one with queen over to f5. If he goes anywhere else, if he just brings it, let's say, back to e8, then that's fine. Queen's just going to come over here and capture here on c5. Again, the king can no longer move. He's going to be in the center of the board being chased around the rest of the game. This is going to be very, very good for white going forward. So just that simple little move, bringing your pawn up here to c3, all of a sudden things just fall apart for black. Now, he doesn't necessarily have to take. If we come back here after this move, pawn to c3, another move you may see is knight to f6. Very, very common. Again, this is the two knights defense. Sometimes you'll see it even before the bishop comes out here to c5. Anytime you see this, you're just going to go ahead and move your pawn forward. Again, trying to kick this knight off the board, trying to see where he wants to go. Now, really, beginner players will just kick their knight back to g8. They're just losing more and more momentum, or tempo, as a lot of people call it. But they do have two other moves. They could always bring their pawn down to d5, and from here the bishop's just going to come over to b5, putting a lot of pressure right here on this knight, pinning it down to the king. Or another move you may see is the knight coming down here to e4, and then the bishop can just swing here to d5, attacking both this knight here on c6 or the knight here on e4. Again, very, very good move from white. It's going to have a very, very strong game. Again, later on into the game, the queen can come here to b3 if it needs to, supporting this bishop here on d5. White can always castle on the king side. If white's ever captured here on c3, then white can always, recapture with his knight here on c3. Again, this is a great square for this knight. Again, a lot of different options for white, and black really has to be very, very careful because, again, anytime white wants to, he can come over here and capture this pawn here on f7 if, let's say, this pawn comes down and captures on c3. So that's definitely why, out of all the different options, that I really like just the simple move of playing pawn c2 to c3. Next variation we're going to be looking at is bishop down to b4, and if you've never played from black's perspective before, this seems like a logical move. Come down, develop one of your pieces, attack your opponent's king. You do have some pressure on this c3 square, so he may think that the pawn's not going to come up here to c3, but it is. So the pawn's just going to come here to c3. If black recaptures right here, white's going to recapture with his pawn, forcing this bishop to move back. Now black does have a lot of different places he can go. If he does come to c5, hopefully you've seen this position on the board before, and you know right away that white's going to come over here and capture here on f7, so that after the king comes back and recaptures, then the queen's going to come back and take this bishop right here. Again, this black king is going to be chased all over the board. It's going to have nowhere safe to go because he cannot castle for the rest of the game. So again, the black bishop doesn't have to go to c5. He could always come back to a5, where from here, since the king is being pinned down this pawn with his bishop, then white can go ahead and castle on the king side. He can always, if he wanted to, bring the knight up here to g5, again putting a lot of pressure on this square on f7. The bishop, if let's say the bishop comes back to d6, this is pretty good, mostly because he's blocking off this pawn here on d7, which is a strong pawn to go ahead and start to push forward so he can get his light square bishop involved into the game. Black's kind of choking himself right now. There's not a lot of room for him to develop right here. From here, white can kind of do the same thing. He can go and castle on the king side, but in this case, he can start to bring his rook over to e1. Once his rook's on e1, he can start to push forward with his pawns, again doing a lot of pressure on black. He could always bring his queen over to b3, again lining up his queen and his light square bishop on this f7 square right here. So white has a lot of different options. Kind of the board is open for him. He can always get his dark square bishop involved into the game later on if he wants to. Black, again, still trying to figure out what he's going to do right now. There's no real way for him to develop his pieces very easily. It's going to take him quite a few moves, and white just has so many different options. So definitely another good option. Again, black could always bring his bishop back to, if we come back here, he could always bring his bishop back to, let's say, f8. We're going to talk about f7 here shortly, but if he brings it back to f8, this is, again, a terrible move. You never want to develop your pieces, allow your opponent to start to move forward, and then the one piece that you did move out, bring it back to the 8th row. White's just going to have a huge, huge developmental advantage right here. It's going to be really hard for black to overcome that. The next variation that we're going to be looking at is bishop to e7. Now from here, white really has three main options, two of which are very, very sound, but I just don't play that much. And then the third one, which I think's just a little bit more exciting, so I played a lot. But the first one, just castling on the king side. Again, this is an okay move. Again, getting ready to develop your other pieces, bringing your rook over to e1. This is completely fine. Also, just taking here on d4 with your knight. That's a completely okay move. The move that I really like is just pawn here to c3. Now, if he does take, white has a strong attack. He can bring his queen up to d5. Again, we've kind of seen this queen coming to d5 quite a bit in the Scotch Gambit, so kind of get used to it. Again, putting a lot of pressure on this f7 square. Black really has to figure out how to defend this. Really, the only good way to defend this is bringing the knight over here to h6. White can go ahead and recapture that with his bishop here on h6, and then black's going to just castle on the king side. Obviously, it's not going to do any good if he takes with his pawn right now, because again, white's still threatening this queen takes here on f7. So after black captures here on the king side, white has a few options. I think that the best option for here is white to go ahead and develop his minor piece right here to c3, capturing this pawn. He's okay to go ahead and give up this bishop here on h6. So after the pawn takes, then the queen's going to swing over here to h5. Again, putting a ton of pressure. Both this bishop here and this queen are both attacking this pawn on f7. The queen, if he wants to, next move can go ahead and take this pawn on h6. Again, there's just a huge gaping hole right here to attack this king. It's really going to be hard for him to hold on the rest of the game. So, again, that's why I like that subtle move, that pawn from c2 to c3. Even when the bishop starts here on e7, I think it's a very, very powerful move. Now, again, he doesn't necessarily have to capture, so if we come back here, if it's just this pawn from c2 to c3, and let's say the knight's going to come over here to f6, very common move. Same theme as we've seen before, the pawn just going to kind of push forward with pawn to e5. The knight's now going to come here to two different options. So the knight could come down here to e4, and now the bishop's going to come here to d5, again putting pressure both on this knight on c6 and on this knight on e4. Or another move you may see a lot is, counterattacking. You could see that the pawn come down here to d5. Now, typically in the past variations, we've seen just the bishop coming here to b5. Again, you don't want to get rid of your bishop. You don't want to trade that off, so you go ahead and move your bishop here to b5, pinning the knight down. But instead, we're going to do something a little bit different, and it's only because the bishop is here on e7. So instead of bringing our bishop, we're going to go ahead and take here on f6. And if black responds, taking with his pawn here on c4, then as you can tell why we decided to exchange, and that is because we can now take here on e7, gobbling up more and more pieces. So this is definitely going to be winning for white. So a lot of different variations, and they all again stem from this nice little move, pawn c2 to c3, which is why I think it's such a huge asset as you're going through all the different variations. Again, some others are very, very solid as well, but I think against a human opponent, this c2 to c3, if black has not seen it, just destroys them from all the play testing that I've seen using the Scotch Gambit. The last variation that we're going to be going over is just the two knights defense, which we'll see quite often, and it's just knight here to f6. Again, as we've talked about before, hopefully you've seen the theme right here. From here, white's just going to push forward with his pawn here to e5. Black has a few different options, probably one of his strongest one right here. Again, the two knights defense is probably one of the stronger defenses that he can play during this, but if he does decide to go ahead and bring his knight down here to g4, again, he does have two attackers on this pawn right here. White's just going to go ahead and castle on the king side. He's not too worried about this. He right now only has this knight here on f3, but he kind of has this rook as well, meaning that, if the knight were to capture here on e5, after the knight captures and after the knight recaptures here on e5, then the rook can come in here, pin down this knight to the king. Black had always tried to, bring his pawn here to d6, so if, white captures right here. But all white really has to do now is remove that piece, and he could just play pawn to f4. meaning that the knight can no longer move, but he is pinned down with this rook here to the king, so he's going to end up losing this piece. So again, all you have to do if you see that knight coming over here to g4, just go ahead and castle on the king side. Now another option that you may see, instead of the knight coming down here to g4, you could always see just knight to e4. You don't see it as much, but I've seen this every now and then. But all in all, I still think, even regardless of where he does play, I think white has a lot of different options, and it's going to play really, really well. So those are the 4 main lines that you'll really see in the Scotch Gambit. So play around with it. Let me know what you guys think. I've had great success with it. I really enjoy these really aggressive lines from white, putting a lot of pressure on black early on into the game, always setting many traps along the way that anytime they think they're making a good move, you can just kind of instantly attack and then chase their king around for the rest of the game. I love that. Hopefully you guys enjoy that as well. If you haven't seen this opening before, I think you're really going to enjoy it. So check it out and let me know what you guys think, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Thanks for watching.